He started with nothing but a dream. He conquered the world, until it all came crashing down. I built this place for them.
Every sacrifice, every dream, and in the end.
Before we begin, I want you to imagine something. Imagine building a house with your own hands. Every brick, every wall, every sacrifice. Now imagine waking up one morning to discover that the people you built it for have quietly changed the locks and convinced the world that you were the thief. What would you do? Would you fight? Would you seek revenge? Or would you disappear and start over? Stay with me, because today's story isn't just about money. It's about betrayal. The kind that doesn't come from strangers. The kind that comes from the people whose names are written next to yours in the family Bible. And before we dive in, tell me in the comments, do you believe family should always be forgiven? Or are there some betrayals that deserve permanent distance? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Now let's begin. There was a time when Arthur believed he was one of the luckiest men alive. Not because he was rich, not because he owned luxury cars, not because he lived in a penthouse overlooking the city, but because he believed he had something many wealthy people spend their lives searching for, a successful business and a loyal family. At least, that's what he thought. 20 years earlier, Arthur wasn't wealthy. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't connected. He was just a skinny young man sitting in a damp basement apartment with a second-hand laptop balanced on a folding table. The ceiling leaked whenever it rained. The heater barely worked. And some nights, he had to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying groceries. But Arthur possessed something dangerous, an obsession. While other people slept, Arthur studied. While other people complained, Arthur built. While other people waited for opportunities, Arthur created them. For 6 years, he lived like a ghost. No vacations, no parties, no weekends, only work. His friends laughed at him. His relatives questioned him. Even some family members quietly called him foolish. Nobody gets rich sitting in front of a computer. Get a real job. You're wasting your life. Arthur heard it all, but every insult became fuel. And slowly, something began to happen. The tiny digital agency he started from that basement began attracting clients, then larger clients, then national clients, then international contracts. The company grew, the revenue multiplied, and suddenly the same people who once questioned his dream began celebrating his success. Funny how that works. People rarely believe in your vision while you're building it. They wait until the building is finished. Then they ask for a room inside. Arthur didn't mind. In fact, he welcomed it. Because unlike many wealthy entrepreneurs, Arthur wasn't motivated by greed. He genuinely wanted everyone around him to win. He wanted his success to become his family's success. His younger brother, Julian, became the company's chief financial officer. His brother-in-law joined operations. His cousins received management positions. Family dinners became celebrations. Holiday gatherings became victory laps. Arthur looked around the table and felt proud. This wasn't just a business. It was a legacy, a kingdom built by family, or so he believed. Because while Arthur was celebrating growth, something darker was growing beneath the surface. And the people he trusted most were already sharpening the knife. The terrifying thing about betrayal isn't that you don't see it, it's that you never think to look. Because betrayal never arrives wearing the face of an enemy. It arrives smiling. It hugs you. It eats dinner with you. It tells you it loves you. And then one day, it empties your pockets while you're still thanking it for being there. Success changes many things. Your address, your bank account, your opportunities. But perhaps the most dangerous thing success changes is the way people see you. Within a decade, Arthur's company had become one of the fastest-growing firms in the industry. The business generated millions. The media began noticing. Business magazines requested interviews. Industry conferences invited him to speak. People called him a visionary. Some even called him a genius. Arthur hated those labels. Because nobody saw the years of uncertainty. Nobody saw the nights he fell asleep at his desk. Nobody saw the panic attacks, the sacrifices, the fear. They only saw the finished product, the polished version, the success story. But there was one person who had witnessed the entire journey, Julian, his younger brother. Julian had been there before the first client, before the first office, before the first dollar. If Arthur was the architect, Julian was the witness. And that made Arthur trust him more than anyone else in the world. One day, Arthur often told friends, "If I ever step away from this company, Julian will run it." That wasn't just confidence, it was faith. The kind of faith only family can inspire or destroy. As the company expanded, Arthur delegated more responsibility. At first, it seemed logical. Julian handled the finances. He understood the books. He managed investor reports. He approved transactions. He monitored expenditures. Everything financial eventually flowed through him. And because business was booming, nobody questioned the numbers, including Arthur. After all, why would he? The company was breaking records. Revenue was climbing. Clients were happy. Employees were thriving. Every report looked healthy. Every presentation looked perfect. Every forecast pointed upward. The machine appeared flawless. But perfection is often the first sign that something is wrong. Because real businesses have problems. Real businesses have fluctuations. Real businesses experience setbacks. Yet somehow every report Julian submitted painted a picture of perfection. And Arthur mistook perfection for competence. In reality, it was camouflage. Months passed, then years. Small irregularities began appearing. Tiny things. The kind of things most people ignore. A delayed payment here. An unexplained expense there. A vendor Arthur didn't recognize. A missing invoice. Nothing large enough to trigger panic. Nothing dramatic enough to raise alarms. Just enough to create a feeling. A feeling Arthur couldn't quite explain. Have you ever experienced that? That strange sensation that something isn't right? No evidence. No proof. Just intuition. A quiet voice in the back of your mind. Arthur heard that voice several times, but he silenced it. Because trusting family felt easier than questioning them. And that's where many people make their greatest mistake. They confuse trust with immunity. They believe someone they love is incapable of hurting them. But being related to someone doesn't make them incapable of betrayal. It only makes the betrayal harder to imagine. One evening, after a company celebration, Arthur found himself standing alone on the rooftop terrace of a luxury hotel. The city lights stretched endlessly before him. For a brief moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The company was thriving. His family was successful. His future looked secure. Everything he had worked for was finally coming together. Then Julian joined him, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Quite a journey," Julian said. Arthur smiled. "Just getting started." Julian raised his glass. "To family." Arthur raised his own. "To family." Neither brother knew it then. But one of them was telling the truth, and the other was already planning his exit. Years later, that conversation would replay inside Arthur's mind countless times. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Sometimes betrayal doesn't begin with hatred. Sometimes it begins with envy. The quiet envy nobody notices. The kind that grows in silence. The kind hidden behind congratulations. Behind smiles. Behind handshakes. Behind family photos. And envy is dangerous because it never announces itself. It waits. It studies. It calculates. And when the opportunity finally arrives, it strikes. What Arthur didn't know was that the strike had already begun, behind closed doors, beyond boardrooms, beyond spreadsheets. A second set of books had been created. A network of shell companies had quietly appeared. Money had begun moving, slowly, carefully, almost invisibly. Not enough to attract attention, not enough to trigger suspicion, just enough to build a hidden river beneath the surface of the company. And every month, that river grew larger. Meanwhile, Arthur focused on expansion, new markets, new partnerships, new opportunities. The future looked brighter than ever. But while he was looking ahead, the people closest to him were quietly digging a grave behind him. And the worst part? They weren't strangers. They weren't competitors. They weren't enemies. They were family. The people sitting beside him at Christmas. The people sharing meals with him. The people laughing in family photographs. The people he would have trusted with his life. Soon, they would take everything. And Arthur wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. There is a moment before every collapse. A moment so small that most people miss it. A tiny crack, a subtle warning, a quiet disturbance in an otherwise peaceful world. Looking back, Arthur would later realize the signs had always been there. He simply chose not to see them. Because the truth is this: most disasters don't arrive without warning. They arrive with whispers, and whispers are easy to ignore. The first whisper came during a quarterly board meeting. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, just a simple question. One of the senior managers pointed toward a financial report projected on a screen. "Can someone explain this expense category?" The room became silent. Arthur glanced at the report. A six-figure payment. Authorized, processed, closed. Yet nobody seemed to know exactly where it had gone. Julian answered almost immediately. Vendor restructuring costs. Simple, confident, professional. The room accepted the explanation. The meeting continued. Everyone moved on. Everyone except Arthur. For reasons he couldn't explain, something about Julian's answer felt rehearsed, too smooth, too quick, like a man who had anticipated the question before it was asked. But Arthur pushed the feeling aside. After all, Julian was family, and family deserved trust. At least that's what Arthur believed. Weeks later, another strange incident occurred. A longtime supplier called Arthur directly. That had never happened before. The supplier sounded nervous, almost uncomfortable. "Arthur, I wanted to verify something." "Sure. We received a request from your finance department." "And?" It wasn't typical. Arthur frowned. "What kind of request?" A long pause. Then came the answer. "They asked us to route future payments through a different company." Arthur felt a slight knot form in his stomach. What company? The supplier provided a name. Arthur had never heard it before. Not once. Not ever. The call lasted less than 5 minutes. Yet after hanging up, Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Still, he did what many successful people do when uncomfortable truths appear. He rationalized them away. Business is complicated. Companies evolve. Systems change. There must be a reasonable explanation. There always is, right? The human mind has an incredible ability to protect itself from painful realities. Sometimes, we don't reject the truth because we can't see it. We reject it because accepting it would force us to confront something terrifying. Arthur wasn't afraid of financial loss. He was afraid of discovering that his brother might not be who he thought he was. And that possibility felt impossible. Months passed. The whispers grew louder. Several employees resigned unexpectedly. A few department heads requested meetings with Arthur. Their concerns sounded similar: confusion, missing information, unusual instructions, restricted access. Yet every road eventually led back to Julian. And every explanation sounded reasonable, plausible, believable. At least believable enough. Then came the night Arthur couldn't sleep. No particular reason, no emergency, no crisis, just a strange feeling. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he found himself sitting alone in his home office. The city outside his penthouse window was silent. Most people were asleep. But Arthur sat staring at a spreadsheet. The numbers looked normal, yet something bothered him. A pattern, or rather, the absence of one. For years he had studied business growth. He knew how healthy companies behaved. He knew how financial trends moved. And suddenly he realized something. The company's profits were increasing. Revenue was increasing. Expenses appeared stable. Yet cash reserves weren't growing proportionately. The math wasn't adding up. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. Enough to make him uncomfortable. Enough to make him wonder. Enough to make him start digging. The next morning he requested additional documentation. Nothing aggressive, nothing confrontational, just routine verification. Or so he told himself. Julian appeared calm, too calm. "Of course," he said. "I'll have everything sent over." The documents arrived later that afternoon. Arthur reviewed them carefully. Everything appeared perfect. Almost perfect. Suspiciously perfect. Every file, every signature, every authorization, every transaction. Organized, polished, clean. Looking back, Arthur would later understand what made him uneasy. Real businesses are messy. Perfect records often mean someone has spent considerable effort creating them. Yet even then, he stopped short of fully investigating. Part of him didn't want to know, because if his suspicions were true, the consequences would be devastating, not just financially, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. How do you investigate someone you've trusted your entire life? How do you question someone whose children call you uncle? How do you prepare yourself for the possibility that your own family is lying to your face? Most people can't. Arthur couldn't. At least not yet. Then came the email. The email that changed everything. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. No warning, no urgency. Just another message among hundreds. Arthur almost ignored it. Almost. The subject line read, "Notice of Compliance Review." At first, he wasn't concerned. Large companies face audits all the time. Reviews happen. Checks happen. It's part of doing business. But as he continued reading, something changed. His pulse quickened. His breathing slowed. A cold sensation moved through his body. The audit wasn't random. It was targeted. Specific transactions had triggered concerns. Specific accounts required investigation. Specific transfers demanded explanation. And those transactions represented millions of dollars. Millions. Arthur immediately called Julian. No answer. He called again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. For the first time in years, his brother wasn't available. Hours passed. Then an entire day. Still no response. That night, Arthur barely slept. By morning, the investigators had already begun requesting documents. Employees were being questioned. Records were being reviewed. The atmosphere inside the company shifted. Whispers spread through hallways. Fear replaced confidence. Rumors multiplied. And somewhere deep inside his chest, Arthur felt a terrifying realization beginning to emerge. Not certainty, not yet, just a possibility. A possibility so horrifying that his mind refused to accept it. What if the missing money wasn't a mistake? What if it wasn't incompetence? What if it wasn't negligence? What if it was theft? And what if the thief wasn't hiding outside the company, but inside his own family? 3 days later, Arthur drove to headquarters. He needed answers. He needed to speak with Julian face to face. He needed this nightmare to end. But when he arrived, Julian's office was empty. The desk was cleared. The computer was gone. The family photographs had disappeared. Even the nameplate had been removed. There was no note, no explanation, no goodbye, only silence. And in that moment, the first crack in Arthur's world became a complete shattering, because deep down, for the first time, he finally understood. His brother wasn't missing. His brother was running. And he wasn't running from danger. He was running from the truth. The truth Arthur was finally about to discover. A truth that would cost him everything. There are moments in life that divide time into two parts, before and after. For Arthur, the day his kingdom burned began like any other. The sun rose, coffee was poured, emails arrived, cars filled the streets. The world continued spinning, yet by sunset, everything he had spent 20 years building would be gone. Not physically, not yet, but spiritually, emotionally, publicly, destroyed. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within days, financial regulators, compliance officers, and legal teams were combing through years of records. The deeper they looked, the worse things became. Shell companies, fabricated invoices, unauthorized transfers, hidden accounts, millions of dollars that had quietly vanished. The evidence pointed in one direction, straight toward the executive team. And unfortunately for Arthur, his signature appeared everywhere. The signatures were forged, but proving that would take time. Time he didn't have. Because public opinion doesn't wait for facts. Public opinion creates its own facts. The first article appeared on a Thursday morning. Arthur saw it while sitting alone in his office. The headline felt like a punch to the chest. Tech CEO under investigation for financial misconduct. No conviction, no evidence, no trial. Yet the damage was immediate. Clients began calling. Investors demanded answers. Partners became nervous. Employees started whispering. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked at him with suspicion, as if he had suddenly become a stranger, a dangerous stranger. One article became 3, 3 became 10, 10 became dozens. Every news outlet wanted a story, and scandals sell better than truth. The world wasn't interested in hearing Arthur's side. The world had already chosen its villain. Every empire needs a king, and every collapse needs someone to blame. Arthur became that person. The following week was worse. Several major clients terminated contracts. Investors withdrew support. Projects were suspended. Revenue stopped flowing. Fear spread through the company like wildfire. Arthur watched years of work evaporate in real time. Entire departments began preparing for layoffs. People who had spent years working alongside him quietly started updating their resumes. Nobody wanted to be associated with a sinking ship, and Arthur couldn't blame them, because from the outside, the ship looked doomed. Then came the betrayal he never saw coming. His family, the very people involved in the scheme, the people who knew the truth, the people who could have stood beside him. Instead, they protected themselves. Statements were made, lawyers were hired, stories were rewritten, and somehow, the narrative changed. Arthur wasn't presented as a victim. He was presented as the mastermind, the architect, the leader, the man allegedly responsible for everything. When Arthur first heard this accusation, he laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. The kind of absurdity that shocks the human brain. His own brother, the man he had trusted more than anyone, the man he had elevated, protected, defended, rewarded, had quietly positioned him as the scapegoat. Arthur kept waiting for someone to correct the record, someone to tell the truth, someone to speak up. Nobody did. Not his brother, not his brother-in-law, not the relatives who had benefited from his generosity, not the people who once called him family. Silence. Only silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest betrayal of all. Weeks turned into months. Courtrooms replaced boardrooms. Lawyers replaced investors. Depositions replaced business meetings. Every morning felt heavier than the last. Arthur's world became paperwork, accusations, and uncertainty. The penthouse was sold. The luxury cars disappeared. Investments were liquidated. Assets vanished, one by one, piece by piece, like watching an entire life being dismantled in slow motion. But losing money wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part happened one rainy afternoon. Arthur sat alone in a nearly empty apartment. No staff, no assistants, no executives, no family, only silence. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Inside, the walls felt hollow. For the first time in years, there was nowhere he needed to be. No meeting, no conference call, no urgent decision, nothing. And that's when it hit him. Not the financial loss, not the legal nightmare, the loneliness. A loneliness so deep it felt physical. For 20 years, Arthur's identity had been connected to success. He was the founder, the provider, the leader, the problem solver, the one everyone relied upon. Now who was he? Without the company, who was Arthur? Without the title, who was Arthur? Without the people surrounding him, who was Arthur? The questions haunted him, day after day, night after night. There were mornings he struggled to get out of bed, evenings where he stared at the ceiling for hours, moments when the future looked like a blank page he no longer knew how to write on. And perhaps the cruelest part of betrayal is this. It doesn't only make you question the people who hurt you, it makes you question yourself. Arthur replayed every memory, every conversation, every decision, searching for the moment he should have known, searching for the warning sign he missed, searching for proof that he wasn't a fool. But hindsight is a brutal teacher. It shows you every clue after the mystery has already been solved. Then came the holidays. The season that once filled him with joy, family gatherings, shared meals, laughter, traditions. Now they became reminders, painful reminders. His phone remained silent, no invitations, no messages, no apologies. The people who had once occupied every corner of his life had vanished, as though he had never existed, as though 20 years of love, sacrifice, and loyalty meant nothing. That winter became the darkest season of Arthur's life, not because he lost his fortune, but because he lost his faith in people. And when a man loses faith in people, he begins losing faith in himself. The kingdom was gone, the throne was gone, the family was gone, and standing among the ashes, Arthur faced a terrifying question. How do you rebuild a life when the people you built it for are the ones who destroyed it? At that moment, he had no answer. None. But sometimes, the answer doesn't appear when you're at your strongest. Sometimes it appears when you have absolutely nothing left. And Arthur was about to discover that rock bottom isn't always the end of the story. Sometimes, it's the beginning of the chapter nobody talks about. Nobody tells you what happens after the collapse. The headlines disappear. The phone stops ringing. The lawyers move on to new clients. The world finds a new scandal to discuss, and suddenly you're left alone with the wreckage. For Arthur, the first 6 months felt less like living and more like existing. Every morning began the same way. He would wake up, stare at the ceiling, and spend several minutes trying to find a reason to get out of bed. Not because he was lazy, not because he had given up, but because grief is exhausting, and betrayal creates a unique kind of grief. You aren't mourning a death, you're mourning a reality that no longer exists. The family you thought you had, the future you imagined. The trust you believed was unbreakable, gone, all gone. And unlike financial loss, there is no insurance policy for a broken heart. The apartment Arthur rented after losing the penthouse was small, painfully small, the kind of place he hadn't lived in since his early 20s. At first, the silence bothered him. Then it haunted him. No meetings, no assistants, no family dinners, no celebrations, just silence. A silence so deep that he could hear the hum of the refrigerator from across the room. One evening, he caught himself staring at an empty chair for nearly 20 minutes. The chair wasn't special. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't connected to any particular memory. Yet somehow it represented everything he had lost. The people who once filled his life. The conversations, the laughter, the sense of belonging. The realization hit him like a wave. He wasn't just lonely. He was grieving. And grief doesn't follow a schedule. Some days he felt fine. Other days a random memory could destroy him. A photograph, a familiar street, a holiday commercial, a song playing in a grocery store. The smallest things became emotional landmines. One afternoon, while cleaning old files from his laptop, Arthur found a picture from years earlier. It had been taken during a family vacation. Everyone was smiling, arms around each other, laughing, looking happy. For several seconds, Arthur simply stared at the screen. Then he asked himself a question that would haunt him for months. Was any of it real? The vacations, the celebrations, the promises, the love. Was it real? Or had he spent years believing in a story that only existed in his head? That question hurt more than the fraud, more than the lawsuits, more than losing the money. Because if the relationships weren't real, then what exactly had he spent his life building? Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, something began to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a small shift. One morning, Arthur decided to take a walk. Nothing ambitious, just 10 minutes. 10 minutes became 20, 20 became 30. Soon, walking became part of his routine. Then came reading, not business books, not leadership books, not books about money, books about psychology, healing, human behavior, trauma, forgiveness, resilience. For the first time in years, Arthur wasn't trying to build a company. He was trying to understand himself. And what he discovered surprised him. Most of his life had been spent proving his worth to investors, to clients, to competitors, even to family. His success had become his identity. And when the success disappeared, so did his sense of self. That realization was painful, but it was also liberating, because if success wasn't who he was, then perhaps failure wasn't who he was either. For the first time in years, Arthur began asking different questions. Not, how do I get my company back? Not, how do I get revenge? Not, how do I prove them wrong? Instead, who am I without all of this? The answer didn't come quickly. Healing rarely does, but every day brought a small victory. A healthier meal, a completed book, a morning walk, a better night's sleep, a conversation with someone new. Tiny victories, victories nobody would celebrate, victories nobody would post online. Yet those victories mattered more than any business deal he had ever signed, because this time, he wasn't rebuilding an empire. He was rebuilding a human being. And unlike money, character compounds quietly. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after everything collapsed, Arthur found himself sitting on a park bench. Children played nearby. Birds moved between trees. The world continued exactly as it always had. And suddenly, a thought entered his mind. A thought that stopped him cold. For the first time in 2 years, he hadn't thought about revenge, not once. The realization shocked him. Because revenge had become a constant companion, a fantasy, a conversation, a movie playing endlessly inside his head. For months, He had imagined confronting Julian, imagined exposing everyone, imagined watching them suffer, imagined making them feel the same pain they had caused him. But sitting there on that bench, something strange happened. The desire felt smaller, weaker, distant, almost irrelevant. And that's when Arthur began understanding something most people never realize. Hatred feels powerful, but in reality, hatred is exhausting. It chains you to the very people you're trying to escape. Every moment spent replaying the betrayal was another moment they continued occupying space inside his mind. Even in their absence, they still controlled him. That realization changed everything, because Arthur finally understood a truth that would shape the rest of his life. The opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And he wasn't quite there yet. But for the first time, he could see it on the horizon. What Arthur didn't know was that life was quietly preparing one final test. A test far more difficult than losing money. A test far more difficult than rebuilding. A test that would determine whether he had truly healed. Because 3 years after the collapse, a message would arrive. A simple message, just a few words. Yet those words would force Arthur to confront the most difficult question of his entire journey. Can you truly move forward if the people who broke you suddenly want to come back? And when that message finally appeared, everything would change. Not because of what it said, but because of what Arthur felt when he read it, or more accurately, what he didn't feel. 3 years. 3 years since the collapse. 3 years since the headlines. 3 years since the lawsuits. 3 years since the betrayal. 3 years since Arthur lost everything he thought mattered. By then, life looked very different. Not perfect, not glamorous, but peaceful. And peace, Arthur had learned, was far more valuable than success. His consultancy had grown steadily. Nothing flashy, no luxury magazines, no viral interviews, no public displays of wealth, just honest work, reliable clients, and a quiet life. The kind of life he once would have considered boring. Now it felt priceless. The strange thing about healing is that you often don't realize it's happening. You don't wake up one morning and announce, "I've healed." Instead, healing arrives quietly. One ordinary day at a time, one decision at a time, one breath at a time. Until eventually you look back and realize you're no longer carrying what once crushed you. That was where Arthur found himself. Not completely healed, but no longer broken. Then the message arrived. A Thursday evening, just after sunset, Arthur had finished work and was sitting near the window of his apartment. A cup of coffee rested beside him. The city lights flickered in the distance. His phone vibrated. One notification, one message, one name, Julian. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Not because Arthur was angry, not because he was afraid, because he was surprised. 3 years. 3 years of silence. And now this. His thumb hovered over the screen. Part of him wondered if he should ignore it. Part of him wondered if he should delete it immediately. Instead, he opened the message. It contained only one sentence. "I'm sorry. We should talk." Arthur stared at the words, again and again and again. Then he waited. Waited for the anger. Waited for the sadness. Waited for the pain. Waited for the rage he had imagined so many times. Nothing came. Absolutely nothing. And that realization unsettled him more than the message itself. Because years earlier, this text would have consumed him. He would have spent hours analyzing every word, every comma, every possible meaning. He would have imagined conversations, arguments, confrontations, closures. But now, the message felt strangely small, like a letter arriving after the war had already ended. Arthur set the phone down, then picked it up again. He reread the message, not because he cared what it meant, because he was trying to understand what had changed. And slowly, the answer emerged. The message hadn't changed. Julian hadn't changed. Arthur had changed. For years, he believed healing would come through an apology, a confession, an explanation, a moment where the people who hurt him finally admitted what they had done. But healing never arrived that way. It arrived through acceptance. Acceptance that some questions would never be answered. Acceptance that some wounds leave scars. Acceptance that some people never become who you hoped they would be. The greatest mistake many people make after betrayal is believing their peace depends on someone else's actions. an apology, a confession, justice, closure. But what happens when those things never come? Do you remain trapped forever? Do you spend decades waiting? Do you allow the people who hurt you to continue controlling your happiness? Arthur finally understood the answer. No. Peace begins the moment you stop waiting, the moment you stop negotiating with the past, the moment you stop demanding that reality becomes something it never was. The truth was painful. Julian's apology couldn't restore 20 years. It couldn't rebuild trust. It couldn't erase betrayal. It couldn't give Arthur back the person he used to be. And perhaps most importantly, Arthur no longer needed it to. That realization felt like unlocking a prison door. A prison he didn't even realize he was still inside. Many people think freedom means getting what you want. But real freedom often comes from no longer needing it, no longer needing the apology, no longer needing the explanation, no longer needing revenge, no longer needing people to finally understand your pain. Arthur looked at the screen one final time. Then he did something simple, something ordinary, something that carried more power than any confrontation. He blocked the number. No speech, no dramatic response, no final argument, no declaration, just silence. The kind of silence that only exists when a chapter is truly over. For a few moments he sat there, looking out at the city, breathing, thinking. Then a memory surfaced. The rooftop conversation years earlier. The night he and Julian raised their glasses to family. At the time, Arthur believed family was defined by blood. Now he understood something different. Family isn't defined by who shares your DNA. Family is defined by who protects your peace. Who tells the truth when lies are easier? Who stays when staying is difficult? Who celebrates your success without secretly resenting it? Who remains loyal when loyalty becomes expensive? Blood may connect people, but character reveals them. And that lesson had cost Arthur millions to learn. Yet strangely enough, he no longer regretted it, because losing everything had revealed everything. The collapse showed him who was real. The pain revealed his strength. The silence revealed his value. And the betrayal revealed a truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Not everyone who walks with you is walking for you. Some people are walking with you because of what you can provide. Your money, your influence, your opportunities, your success. And the moment those things disappear, so do they. That realization sounds depressing, but it isn't. It's liberating. Because once you stop expecting loyalty from everyone, you start appreciating it wherever it genuinely exists. And that's where the real story begins. Not the story of losing money, not the story of betrayal, not even the story of recovery. The story of wisdom, the story of discernment, the story of peace, the story of understanding that your value was never tied to your possessions, your title, your business, or the opinions of people who couldn't see your worth. Arthur lost a company, he lost wealth, he lost relationships. But in the process, he gained something far more difficult to obtain, himself. And that is the unspoken chapter, the chapter nobody celebrates, the chapter nobody posts online, the chapter that happens quietly, behind closed doors, the chapter where you stop trying to become who you were before the pain and become someone stronger because of it. Because the ultimate revenge isn't making them suffer. The ultimate revenge is building a life so peaceful that their betrayal no longer has the power to disturb it. And once that happens, the story is no longer about them. It's finally about you. Before we end this story, let's talk about something important, because Arthur's story isn't really about Arthur. It's about us. It's about the choices we make, the people we trust, the boundaries we ignore, and the lessons we often learn too late. If you've listened this far, there's a good chance part of Arthur's story felt familiar. Maybe not the millions of dollars, maybe not the company, maybe not the fraud, but the betrayal, the disappointment, the heartbreak, the realization that someone you trusted wasn't who you believed they were. Most of us have experienced some version of that story. A friend, a business partner, a spouse, a relative, someone we loved, someone we believed in, someone we would have defended without hesitation. Until one day, reality introduced itself. And reality looked nothing like the person we imagined. The first lesson from Arthur's story is simple. Trust should be earned continuously, not granted permanently. One of the most dangerous assumptions people make is believing loyalty is guaranteed because of history, because someone has been in your life for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, because someone shares your last name, because someone stood beside you during difficult times. None of those things guarantee future loyalty. Character is not measured by how someone behaves when everything is going well. Character is measured by what they do when temptation arrives, when money arrives, when power arrives, when opportunity arrives. That's when people reveal themselves. And sometimes, the revelation hurts. The second lesson is even harder. Pay attention to what people repeatedly do, not what they repeatedly say. Julian spoke the language of loyalty, but his actions told a different story. Many people ignore warning signs because they are listening to promises instead of observing patterns. Patterns rarely lie. Words often do. When someone's actions repeatedly create confusion, doubt, and inconsistency, pay attention. Not every red flag is a misunderstanding. Sometimes it's a preview. The third lesson may be the most uncomfortable. Success does not create character. Success exposes character. When Arthur was struggling, everyone seemed united. But once wealth entered the picture, hidden motives surfaced. Envy surfaced, greed surfaced, resentment surfaced, entitlement surfaced. Success often acts like a spotlight. It reveals what was already there. This is why some relationships become stronger after success, and others collapse under its weight. The fourth lesson is one many people spend years resisting. You do not need closure from the people who hurt you. Read that again. You do not need closure from the people who hurt you. Many people remain emotionally trapped because they are waiting for a conversation that will never happen, waiting for accountability, waiting for understanding, waiting for someone to finally admit what they did. Sometimes that moment comes, often it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you have a choice. You can spend years waiting, or you can give yourself the closure they never will. Healing begins when you stop making your peace dependent on another person's growth. The fifth lesson is about boundaries. A lesson Arthur learned painfully. Boundaries are not punishments. They are protection. Many people feel guilty for creating distance. They worry about being selfish, cold, unforgiving. But there is a difference between holding a grudge and protecting your peace. A massive difference. Holding a grudge means carrying the pain forever. Protecting your peace means refusing to reopen wounds that have already healed. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your life. Not because you're better than them, but because your peace matters too. And finally, the lesson at the heart of this entire story, the lesson hidden inside the unspoken chapter. Your greatest asset is not your money, not your career, not your network, not your reputation. It's your mind, your ability to start again, your ability to adapt, your ability to learn, your ability to rebuild. Everything Arthur lost could be taken. His company, his wealth, his possessions. But the knowledge that built those things remained. And that's why he eventually recovered. Because true wealth lives inside you before it ever appears around you. The world often teaches us to measure success by what we own. But life has a way of challenging that definition. Sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the richest. It's the person who survived losing everything and still found a reason to smile. The person who chose peace over revenge, growth over bitterness, wisdom over anger. And if you're currently living through your own difficult chapter, I want you to remember something. The chapter you're in right now is not the entire book. Pain feels permanent while you're experiencing it, but it isn't. Loss feels final while you're living through it, but it isn't. The people who left are not the end of your story. The people who betrayed you are not the end of your story. The mistakes you made are not the end of your story. There is another chapter waiting, a chapter you cannot see yet, a chapter that may eventually make sense of everything you're currently struggling to understand. And perhaps that's why it is called the unspoken chapter. Because while everyone talks about the success, the failure, the betrayal, the comeback, very few people talk about the quiet transformation that happens in between. The transformation that changes who you are forever. And that transformation may become the most valuable part of your journey. If this story resonated with you, tell us in the comments, what is one lesson life taught you through betrayal? Your story may help someone else who is listening right now. And if you enjoy stories that explore the deeper lessons hidden inside life's most difficult moments, subscribe and join us for the next chapter. Because every life contains a story. Every wound contains a lesson. and every ending contains a beginning. Until next time, take care of your peace, protect your mind, and never underestimate the power of the chapter nobody sees coming, the unspoken chapter.